What's up, everyone? This is Matt. Welcome to another semester of the Shine podcast. We're very excited to have you here. So to kick off the semester, here we have Omar Avila. He's a great friend, old mentor, leader at the Honors College, overall great person. Right now, he's studying at the Broad Institute. He's doing research there for his post-bac years. And I'll actually let you introduce yourself.
Hey Matt, yeah, thank you so much for having me here. It's really a pleasure to be part of what you guys are doing. So yeah, as you said, I'm currently at the Broad Institute studying cancer immunotherapy in the Manguso lab while I prepare for my applications for MD PhD program. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so first of all, big change, right? You went from living in Florida to being out up there in the Northeast. That's it's got to be a pretty crazy environmental shift, right? Now, like you went from like a beach town to just like a full-on city.
Yeah, definitely. It's a stark difference. I think it's interesting that in Florida you can sort of live in your own bubble for the most part. You can go from your house to your job and then back to your house, basically in your own transportation mode, and not really have to talk to anyone. Whereas here, it's like you're pretty much obligated to find someone every corner that you look into. It's very rare that you won't be seeing someone in your peripheral vision at least whenever you look into into any direction. So it's very interesting. But yeah, I'm liking the city. Uh, it's definitely a change of pace. But yeah, we'll see how I feel about it in a year or two from now.
Yeah, no, it sounds overall awesome from what I've heard. And yeah, I had some friends who lived up there before, and they really like it. And once they moved out, they ended up like missing it a lot. So um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's cool though. So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing there. You mentioned briefly, right? You're up there, you're abroad. So what is it exactly that you're studying right now?
Yeah. So I joined the cancer immunotherapy lab. Specifically, my project is uh, stems from in vivo screens, essentially where they knock out genes in animals and then they look at what sort of genes have an effect on the response of tumors to immunotherapy. Um, so my project is specifically looking at the effect of a phosphatase uh, that has regulates the interferon that responds to interferon gamma. So currently we are doing different experiments to validate the effect of knocking out this phosphatase. And it's really interesting. Essentially, if you knock out this phosphatase in mice or in tumor cell lines rather, and then or you inhibit it by giving a drug, for example, uh, it essentially results in tumor rejection, which is when the immune system is able to combat the cancer cells. So it allows the immune system to overcome the cancer cells that would be, for example, resistant to other immunotherapies.
So and so pretty much you have these mice, right? And they have tumors. And
Mhm.
what you do is you take out or you stop the function of this phosphatase, and then that will help the immune system essentially fight off the tumor.
Yeah, exactly. So essentially, the bigger problem is that in cancer immunotherapy, there's the one standard of treatment, which is the PD-1 checkpoint blockade. Essentially, what it is uh, uh, treatment with antibodies that essentially allows the immune system to better attack the tumor cells. What happens is that a lot of people, for X or Y reason, are resistant to such an immunotherapy, and so tumors no longer respond to such an immunotherapy. So we're looking at different ways or different immunotherapies that would um, potentially synergize with a PD-1 checkpoint blockade, but maybe also substitute a PD-1 checkpoint blockade. And essentially the drug we're looking at allows the tumor cells to be more sensitive to immune cells, but also it potentiates the response of the immune system. So it basically gives a boost to the immune system so that it can better fight
See.
these tumor cells, and then it overcomes the cancer.
That's really cool. So what you're doing, it sounds very translational. There's direct implications from the model organism to eventually people. And that's something I really like about the Broad Institute. So for those who don't know, Broad Institute is Harvard and MIT. They do a lot of cancer research, and you could probably say more at length because you work there. I only know from the sidelines, but yeah, that's something I really like from up there. How a lot of the places they're very translational,
Mhm.
and they work with a lot of MD PhDs who play on both sides of the spheres. So
Mhm.
that leads me to my next question: is going into this whole sphere of science, what is it that you want to do in the future, having all this experience with translational research?
Mhm. Yeah, that question is very interesting, right? I feel like often the dichotomy of a pre-med student that is interested in science is, do I go into medicine or do I just go into science? So if I go into science, do I go into translational science or do I go into more basic science? I don't know. I feel like often the path that we take in terms of the research that we end up doing is very serendipitous, and it just happens because a mentor that was very influential in your career um, sort of did was a really great mentor, and so you fell in love with the science that they're doing, and so you end up basically just following in their steps. So I don't know. I'm very open to both basic and translational research. I feel like I still have a long way to go, and I could see myself also doing some basic research that somehow you could see as being translational, because that's what we end up doing at the end of the day. But yeah, for now, I am definitely very interested in this cancer immunotherapy research. I can see myself in this field, but you never know. I mean, for example, with the COVID vaccines, the research
Yeah.
that they were doing is very, very basic, but it all of a sudden became very relevant to the current situation. So I could see myself in that sort of situation in that way.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I guess that's somewhere that I am also at. I am deciding whether I like basic science that could eventually go into translational in that sphere. But yeah, like you said, right now, obviously we're all doing work in research labs, and we have these mentors, and we kind of pick up on what they do because they're great. And then we pick up an interest in it. And then you're kind of at this crossroads where you're like, oh, like, do I want to do this? Because now I'm really invested in it or
Mm-hmm.
not?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I change complete course and just use this as really good experience
Mm-hmm.
moving forward? So I
Yeah.
think it's a good spot to be because you have a lot of options and you're playing in different spheres and you get to figure out what you really like.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to your old days, right? Because now you're
Mm-hmm.
you're not an old man, but you do have the old days,
Yeah, it
which
does feel
are
like it somehow.
yeah. So you were here at the Honors College. So why don't we talk a bit about that, of how you found what you liked here, and then how you ended up there at Broad Institute, and then you eventually want to go into med school or grad school and all that stuff.
Sure. I give a brief survey. I don't know how far back you want me to go, but guess I'll start from zero in terms of my research
Yeah,
career.
yeah.
So sophomore year, I double majored in the honors college. I double majored in psychology and cellular neuroscience. So my first research experience was a dry lab research experience in the Vernon lab, uh, mostly based on doing statistical research and also reading a lot of the literature. So that was sort of my first exposure to research. This was very interesting because you are reading, surveying a lot of the literature out there, and then just connecting dots in that sense. So after that, I wanted to get some experience in wet lab research. So I joined a lab at the Scripps Institute, the Grill Lab, where I was looking at neuroscience research, particularly looking at uh, uh, regulators of G protein coupled receptor trafficking. Um, so I did that during my junior year, but at the end of my junior year, that lab moved to the University of Washington.
Oh
So I
man.
ended up having to look to go into another lab. So ultimately, I joined the Venn Prague lab in the Brain Institute of FAU, and there we were looking at the role of exercise in regulating neurogenesis, and particularly its relevance to Alzheimer's.
Yeah, so again, translational research. So you've kind of seen a lot of different fronts of it, right? Like you were
Mm-hmm.
with Vernon Lab, right, doing dry lab and seeing like a whole other side of research, and then
Mm-hmm.
you jump straight into translational and had to move labs. But I think that is ultimately what provided you with what you want to do in the future, right? Like, would you
Mm-hmm.
say that that's the case? Because if you wouldn't have experienced it, then maybe you wouldn't have picked up the interest
Mm-hmm.
and gone to where you are now.
For sure. I think there are different ways that you can discover what you're passionate about. But I think that definitely having a diverse range of experiences that allows you to contrast one experience with the other is a very effective way for you to find out what you really like. Um, it's interesting because the lab at Scripps was doing very basic science research. Um, so looking at the regulation of G protein coupled receptor trafficking, it has implications for a response to opioids in humans. So essentially, the more G protein coupled receptors, especially the mu-opioid receptor, which is a receptor for morphine. So having a given quantity of those receptors in your cell membrane affects the response that you have to morphine, and you could see how having more receptors would lead to you needing a smaller dose of morphine, whereas having less will lead to you needing a higher dose of morphine, which would then becomes a slippery slope because then you could become desensitized to morphine. But really,
Wow.
when you look at it in that sense, it sounds translational, but when you look at it, it's very basic science research because you're looking at the regulation of GPCRs. So I thought that was really interesting. But I wanted to get out of the field of neuroscience just to see whether I was passionate about doing neuroscience research or I was passionate about doing very cellular mechanistic research, which is why I ended up doing immunotherapy research at the Brown. And so far, I really enjoy it. But like I said, I still have a long way to go, and just I don't know, just looking forward to what's waits me in the future.
Yeah, that's really cool. And like you said, yeah, a lot of the, I guess that's really research in general. You're doing all these things and they all could have potential implications, you know, maybe a decade or two after
Mm-hmm.
like long research of it
Mm-hmm.
to translate into human.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just what keeps research going. And that's what I really love about it, because even in basic research, right? Basic science, you're doing all these things. And sometimes I even question, like, why am I doing this? You know, like what effect will this have in the future
Right.
for everyone? But it's just small building blocks. Everybody plays
Yep.
their part. And you look at a paper, you get inspired, you want to pick up a
Mm-hmm.
technique, and then you end up implementing that. So that's
Yeah,
why,
that's a good point.
yeah, like I love research because of that. And it's just like one big collaborative sphere.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
let's talk about moving on from undergrad, right? Because now
Mm-hmm.
you're in your post bac. How did you end up where you're at?
Sure. So before I answer that question, I think you made a really good point just now about the nature of research. I think often people have an idea of research being you just do a set of experiments by yourself, and then you gather data by yourself, and then you present it and then
No,
say, here are
yeah.
the findings. But something that I really enjoy about research is that it's really a collaborative enterprise. And I think it's important that we highlight how collaborative it is, because people often think that it's a very lonely career, and that you most of the time you spend alone. But in reality, you collaborate with scientists all the time, and not only other scientists in other labs, but also within your lab, right? So it's very important to to look for a lab that keeps you engaged, and keeps you excited about the science in general, not just the science that you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's another great point where people think, and I even thought this before I joined the research
Hmm.
sphere. I always thought, oh man, how am I going to come up with a project? How am I going to think of something new? But it's all, collaboration you build up on principles already set by
Yep.
people who preceded you. And like you said, it's all about collaboration.
Hmm.
I've needed help before, and I've reached out to, people who are doing similar things over at NIH or other institutes around.
Hmm.
And it's ultimately been awesome because you build your backbone for networking, and you always have those people in your sphere
Yep.
that you can reach out to, and then they can
Yeah.
reach out to you, and then you can get referrals. So it's a big family at the end of the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. It really is.
And it's ultimately, I think that's what led me into switching my personal track from being straight pre-med, going to
Hmm.
wanting to go to full-on medical school, to wanting to do an MD PhD.
Hmm.
So that's just how I thought of it. But yeah, let's talk about you leaving the undergrad sphere and what you want to do, like as a career, right? Like, do you want to go into just med school or just grad school or both combined? What are you looking at currently?
Right. Yeah. So I think while I was in undergrad, of course, as an undergrad that as I said earlier, that is interested in science, the dichotomy is often, do I want to go into medicine or do I want to go into science? And it's really not an easy time for you to decide as an undergrad whether I want to do one or the other, because you haven't, at least I think people often don't have enough exposure to both sides to decide, oh, I really like this one or I really like the other. Um, and you feel a lot of pressure because you feel like you have to decide before your third year ends so that you can prepare and during your fourth year to submit your applications.
Which I think is
Um,
crazy, by the way. That concept
oh,
is just crazy.
no, yeah, yeah, I would definitely agree. I think as undergrads, we're very young still, and I think most people don't have enough experience at that point to be able to decide. I think, of course, some people have the privilege of going to programs early on and having mentors that allow them to participate in different activities that allow them to make an informed decision. But at least in my case, I was very interested in both medicine and science, so I wasn't quite sure that I wanted to go into science yet. So I decided to take a couple of years to pursue strict science research before I applied to MD PhD programs. And so I started looking into different post-bac experiences and what they would offer. And I decided to go to look into 2-year post-bacs, because that way you are able to use your experience from that first year before you apply at the beginning of your second year, essentially. So I ended up going to the Broad Institute into a 2-year program, and then I'm ramping up to submit my application this next summer.
Which is exciting.
Hmm.
It's a year-long process, but like you said, I think your experience after 1 year, once you reach that 1 year and you get to apply, is not only beneficial for the application, right? But it's also beneficial for you because by that time you've grown and developed, not just in your science career, but as a
Right.
person. And I personally think that's really important. And that's also
Hmm.
why I'm taking a gap year.
Hmm.
I was considering 2 gap years and I'm still not sure. But like you said,
Hmm.
still an undergrad, still
Yeah.
trying to figure it out. And there's nothing wrong with that. You
Hmm.
have your whole life ahead of you to
Yeah.
know what you want to do. And it's better to figure it out right now rather than diving into
Yeah,
something.
10 years down the line.
Right. You're just like, oh man, I don't like this. And then now
Yeah.
it's not too late to turn back, but you've already, burned out all those years.
Right.
So
Yeah, yeah. I think it's valuable to take 1 or 2 extra years to decide what it is that you um, really want to do, at least at that point in time. I think uh, to some extent, right? I think you can't really figure out if this is what you want to do until you do it. And even if I take, 2 years of post-bac and then say I go into a deep PhD program, and then at the end I'm like, well, I don't like the career of a physician scientist. I wouldn't really, call that a failure either. I think there's still value in having an education as a physician scientist, whether I end up being just a physician or whether I end up being just a scientist. Um, I think what I'm trying to stress though is that it's important for to know that you have not failed if you don't know exactly what you want to do at the end of your fourth year of undergrad. I think there are plenty of successful scientists and physicians that have taken time after the undergrad to figure out what it is that they really want to do. So I think it's important to dispel that notion that, if you don't apply to your graduate school, your medical school right after your fourth year, then you have failed. There's definitely value in taking some time to figure out what it is that you want to do.
yeah, and I also think that's sort of the motion right now in our sphere of like pre-med or pre-grad school,
Mm-hmm.
where people are like, okay, I need to take a step back, like everything we just said. And more people are taking gap years.
Yep.
And there are some programs, some MD programs. I'm not sure about MD PhD, but I know that they let you defer your acceptance,
Mm-hmm.
so you could do that. I think some even let you do 2 years of deferment, so you can
Yep.
wait 2 years, get your experience, figure it out, and then you're ready to jump in. So I think
Yeah.
it's a good motion of where we're heading, where it's no longer like, oh my gosh, you're taking a gap year or two. What are you gonna do? That's so bad. So I honestly think it's great.
Yeah. I think also the intuition behind it and the it is well-meaning for you to be proactive about your career and your interests. So I think I would say that that is definitely important. I'm not saying that the intentions of other people to say, hey, you really should invest some time during undergrad to figure out what you want to do. I wouldn't say that's malicious at all. I think that's true. That's good, and I think there are definitely people at the end of their undergrad that are able to say, hey, this is exactly what I want to do. Um, so there's also value in that, but
Yeah.
both ways work. So I would say that you would be fine either way as long as you are making being proactive about your interests and in your career.
Yeah, and then again, these things come in all shapes and sizes. You might want to take some time off for mental health, to
Hmm.
grad school, med school, all sorts of professional school. They're super demanding.
Yeah.
So it's definitely good to do what's best for you. So I think that's a good overall message. And yeah, so I guess before we kind of wrap up a little bit, unless there's something
Hmm.
else you want to talk about, I always want to ask, what is some sort of advice that you would give your younger self now that you are where you are?
Yeah, I think people that are often in medicine and science are very focused in their careers and where they want to go, and often perhaps neglect their life and then relationships in their life, and they fail to account for those as part of the process. So I think while you consider what it is that you want to do, I think it's also important that you think about what your life will look like during that time. So not only whether you want to go to X program because they have a really good research institution, but whether you will be supported at that program and whether you would enjoy living in that area and building a life in sort of that area. I think often people fail to account for those factors, but I think I would say, if not more important, I would say it's just as important that you consider what your life will be during that time, because you're not going to put your life on pause while you spend the 8 years, 10 years, 12 years training. So I would say that that's definitely an advice that I would give my younger self, and people that are currently in those stages and trying to think about where it is that they want to go and what it is that they want to do. By no means I mean that they have to have everything figured out, but I think it's important to keep those in mind.
Yeah, and I totally agree, and I think that's really good advice, because I find it easy to kind of look at where you want to be in the future, and then especially pre-meds, right? It's super career oriented people.
Mm-hmm.
There's the stereotype, they're like very
Mm-hmm.
go.
Yeah.
And it's easy to just get kind of like lost in the sauce, and you're just looking at the
Mm-hmm.
future. You're like, oh, I want to go to this school because they have this, but then wait a minute, I'm gonna graduate when I'm 30 from education. Am I gonna
Exactly.
have my personal life, what I want, whether it's a family, a spouse, or kids, or being I don't know, whatever you want to be? That's
Mm-hmm.
that's really important. So that's really good advice, and
Yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
that's something that I would have liked to have heard in my younger years, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
still in my younger years.
Yeah, definitely. You still have a
So
lot, your whole life ahead of you. So
yeah, so we all have time to apply it, which is good.
definitely,
um
for sure.
yeah, well, Omar, thank you so much for being here. I think we've had a great conversation so far.
Mhm.
Omar has been a great mentor, while he was here, and even while he's up there. He's been great, always good to talk to, give some really good advice. So I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, man. It's been a pleasure to be here with you guys, and please continue to do what you're doing, and I love to be part of it in the future as well. So thank you for everything.
Yeah, for sure. And then you'll see Omar if he has time right now. I know he's busy with with your research and all, but you'll see him around with Engage, so
Yeah,
it'll be
always a
fun.
pleasure. Always a
All right,
pleasure.
so you guys have a great one. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye bye.